In this video, we're going to talk about how to date and number your documents in your real estate transaction. We're going to start off with the residential purchase agreement. So here in the date prepared, you're going to enter in a date that you prepared this document. So it would be whenever you're putting this offer together, you're going to enter in this date. And this is very important because you are going to refer back to this date quite a bit throughout the transaction. So once you have this date in here, if you have a counter offer, and we're going to use the example of a seller multiple counter offer. And here on your seller multiple counter offer, you would date it number 1. So whatever the first document, whatever the first counter is, you're going to name that document number 1. And you're going to refer back to the purchase agreement. So what are you countering? You're countering the purchase agreement, and you're going to date it the same date that was here on your date prepared on your residential purchase agreement. So you're going to enter that date in here. And then you want to make sure that you have the top filled out completely. You want to enter in your buyer's name, your seller's name. We want all of this information filled out. On the seller multiple counteroffer, you're also going to enter in the date that you're preparing this document. So say it's the day after, on the 25th. So you submit this seller multiple counteroffer over to the buyer's agent. Buyer's agent speaks to their client, and the client wants to go ahead and counter this multiple counteroffer. So then we go to the buyer counteroffer. So the buyer's agent will then prepare number 1, buyer counteroffer number 1. They are going to date it for the date that they are preparing it, and then they're going to refer back to the seller multiple counteroffer number 1, and it was July 25th. So going back to our seller multiple counteroffer, they're referring back to this date. Now, once the buyer counteroffer is submitted, and if, say, the seller now just wants to deal with this buyer, they don't want to send out multiple counters after this, they just want to go ahead and deal with this one particular buyer, so they're going to go ahead and submit a seller counteroffer. Now, the seller counteroffer is going to be seller counteroffer number 1. It will not be number 2 because this is the first seller counteroffer in this transaction. So each document has its own numbering. So if the seller counters just as one particular offer, then it would be counteroffer number 1. Now, if the seller was doing multiple counteroffers, then it would be seller multiple counteroffer number 2. So you got to be very careful with this numbering. It can get very confusing. And then on this seller multiple counteroffer number 1, you're going to date it for the date that you're preparing. You're going to refer to what it's countering. So you're countering the buyer counteroffer number 1, and that buyer counteroffer was dated July 26th. So if you go back here, you see it was dated July 26th. Now, the reason why this is so important to have this numbering and dates and the dates correct is because this is linking all these documents together. In a court situation, if you were to have the wrong dates in there or the wrong numbers, the judge is not going to be able to put these documents together. They're not going to be able to link these documents together. So if it were to, let's go back to our seller multiple counteroffer, if this date was wrong in the purchase agreement, for the purchase agreement, the judge is easily going to say this counteroffer was not linked to that contract. So that's why it's very, very important that we get the numbering correct. On addendums as well, when you're adding addendums to the contract, this is where it can be very tricky because we receive a lot of addendums that are all numbered number 1. Now, the first addendum is going to be addendum number 1, but it depends on what it's an addendum to. Is it an addendum to the purchase agreement? Is it an addendum to the TDS? Whatever that is an addendum to, you're going to mark that up at the top of the form, or you can always choose other. So if you're adding an addendum to any particular document in this transaction, you can put other and then name the document here, and then you're going to refer back to the date that particular document is for. So in this case, if it's an addendum to the purchase agreement, our purchase agreement was dated July 24th. If this was an addendum to, let's say, the request for repairs, then you're going to put request for repairs here, and then you're going to put the date of the request for repairs. And I have a sample here. So on our request for repairs, our date was July 28th that it was prepared. So if you're adding an addendum to this request for repairs, on the addendum, you would actually put July 28th here. And then you would mark other and then put in your request for repairs. Now, also on request for repairs forms, you want to make sure that you're filling the top part out completely as well. It defaults that it's a request for repairs to the purchase agreement, but if it's to any other document, say it's a mobile home contract or a probate contract, whatever it may be, then you would mark other and then list that there and the date of that document. Now, if you're preparing a seller response to request for repairs, you're going to want to refer back to which one you're responding to. So are you responding to request for repairs number 1? Is there a number 2? And then what's the date of those documents? So it's very, very important to fill out the top of these forms, again, because it links all these documents together. I hope this video was helpful to let you know how to number and date the documents.